Hi, I'm Malcolm Manners. I am a professor of horticulture at Florida Southern College in Lakeland, Florida. Behind me, my background here is Ruth's Rose Garden on our campus. It has about 300 rose bushes of many different horticultural classes. Many of them are antique or heirloom types. And we prune this garden every year. For one thing, it tends to get too big, and when the roses are above your head and you can't see them anymore, that's not good, and it's just good horticultural practice. So they're almost all grafted to Fortuniana rootstock. That is a very good root system for Florida, but it also promotes the plant becoming extraordinarily large. And so in the spring, usually in the second half of February, we prune this garden. And what I want to demonstrate today is some of the techniques we use. Now, for each group of plants, we'll use a slightly different technique with a slightly different outcome. So what I'm going to demonstrate today, first off, is a pretty typical hybrid tea. That's the usual modern cut flower type rose that most people grow. And then I'm going to follow that up with a true old fashioned tea rose, which is not the same as a hybrid tea. And we prune them to be a much larger size when we're done. So that's what I want to demonstrate today on this video. Here are some close-up shots of how to make the correct cuts on the cane. This cane has been injured by chili thrips, an insect pest that we have here. That's all the silvery damage on the bark. Um, Notice right where that leaf is attached, there is a little pink dot just above it. That is the bud. That's what we're always going to cut to, and that's where the new stem is going to come out. On the left there, the other arrow is pointing to a prickle, often referred to as a thorn. Um, I have seen people who were just learning to prune that cut back to one of those. Don't do that. That prickle will never grow into another stem. And what you'll be left with then is an inch and a half of just stem that won't grow, going from there over on the right to where the actual bud is. The bud is what will grow. Well, by having that stub there, it will eventually die and then it may rot back and you may lose the cane because of it. On your clippers, notice how these clippers are turned. The arrow is pointing toward the sharp blade of the clipper, and then the other side is known as the anvil, and it's not sharp, it's much thicker. Notice that this clipper is turned in such a way that when those cross each other, like the blades of a scissors, the blade is going to be on the side that faces that bud, and therefore on a bush, this is kind of sideways, but the root system of that bush is off to the right. The top part that I'm going to throw away is off to the left. So I want that sharp blade on the side that faces the root system, the part I'm going to keep. That's going to make a much cleaner cut. On the back side where that anvil goes, it's going to bruise the stem. Well, I'm going to throw that stem in the trash, so I don't care about that. But what is left in the bush, I want to be a nice, smooth, clean cut. I'm also going to try to cut it at about a 45-degree angle with that dormant bud above the leaf on the side where the angle goes the highest. And so it kind of slants down behind it. The back side of that cut may not be right level with the bud, but it'll be close to that. You don't want to get much closer to the bud than that. That's maybe more than an eighth, but not more than a quarter of an inch above the bud. If you leave it too long, as I said earlier, you're going to have a stub that dies back. If you get it too close, you might injure the bud itself. So this is a good distance. Along a cane, you're going to choose which bud you cut to based on several things. First off, how tall do you want the bush to be? And by cutting to various buds, you can make it taller or lower. But the other thing to consider is what direction does it aim? So here where I've made this cut, that next stem is going to come out kind of toward us slightly to the left. Had I cut above the bud on that leaf below it that goes off to the right, the new stem would have headed off to the right side. And by choosing that, I can kind of determine where that angular new branch is going to go, which is important if it's right out next to a walkway where I don't want the new branch reaching out to get me. Also, notice that the leaf under that has 5 leaflets. That's the common number for most roses. Some roses will have 7, some only make 3. But in general, if you cut somewhere near the middle of a cane where you have the maximum number of leaflets for that particular variety, you'll get a stronger new growth coming out than if you cut it way up toward the flower where you may be down to only 3 or even 1 leaflet, or if you cut it at the very base where you only have 1 or 3 leaflets. Cutting in the middle of a growth flush of the stem is usually advantageous. This is one of those areas where I'm going to be talking about where you have what we call twiggy growth, where there are too many little stems that aren't really worth much. They're not making big stems. They're not making big flowers. So what I'm going to do here is leave the one that faces left and the one that faces right, and I'm going to remove the 2 thinner ones in the middle. So there, that's been done. That's going to give me much better growth out of that plant than I would have had I left all 4 of those. This is the old hybrid tea rose piece, probably one of the most famous and popular roses of the last century. It's typical of a hybrid tea, and which is what most modern cut flower type roses are. And so in this case, what we want is a plant that's kind of vase shaped, and if you were farther north, you might not want to cut it back very much. But in our area, this one is not terribly tall, but they do get too tall. So I'm going to shorten this quite a lot. I have sterilized my clipper with Lysol spray in case there were any bacterial crown gall or anything else of that sort. These plants are on Fortuniana rootstock, and while Fortuniana makes a really wonderful root system for Florida soils, it's not very physically strong, and so the plants have a tendency to blow over, and because of that you have to keep them staked for the life of the plant. Well, this time of year, a lot of our plants, the stake has come loose and the plant has bent over. So the first thing I'm going to do is straighten this up and retie it to its stake. There is some wisdom in wearing gloves when you do this, but I didn't bring them today. So that would put the plant straight up, right like that. And I want to prune this plant to be symmetrical in the position that I want it to end up in. So the first thing I need to do is stake it. So that's nice and vertical. We're using a plastic covered aluminum stake. I'm tying it with a couple strands of jute cord. And so now this plant is already reasonably well shaped. What I want to do is cut back to dormant buds. And I'm going to take it back to a little under knee high. That would be considered short in a lot of parts of the world, but for here, that's reasonable, simply because we get such vigorous growth throughout the year. I'm also going to take out the older, smaller, thinner, more twiggy growth and try to keep the strong, healthy stuff. I am making each cut just above a good dormant bud where I know it will sprout out nicely. I'm also going to try to keep it from trespassing on its neighbors. In fact, for that reason, I don't think I need any of this. If this were not next to another bush, I might keep this cane, but as it is, I'm going to remove it. Have some canes that are coming up kind of in a center here, and I'm going to get rid of them so that I can open up the center of the bush. That allows more sunlight in, more air movement, so you'll have less problem with black spot disease if you do that. So even though this is a perfectly good cane, and so is the one next to it, because they're in the center, I'm going to remove them. I'm going to remove any dead wood that's here. Okay, I'm going to consider this bush pretty much finished. You can see kind of the ultimate shape there, and the fact that the center is nice and open. It makes kind of a bowl around it. I don't have a lot here on our left, but that's facing another bush, so I'm not too concerned about that. Individual cuts have been made at a slant above a good dormant bud. I don't know if that's focusing there or not, hopefully. And I think I like that bush as it is. This monster is an old tea rose. We don't know for sure its original name, but it was named by its finder as Bassus tea because it came from Bassus in France. The older tea roses are very well adapted to Florida. They like it here, they grow well, they bloom well. They're somewhat more disease resistant than the hybrid teas in general. They tend to make these very large bushes, and they don't appreciate being pruned too hard. So compared to the hybrid tea, I'm going to do less cutting on this one. I'm still going to remove a lot of that bush because I need to get it down less than head high, but I'm going to end up with a much larger bush than I would have had if it were a hybrid tea. Again, this plant is grafted to Fortuniana, so it does have a trunk under there. If you grow your roses on their own roots, they may not have a single trunk like that. This one does. And I don't know if you can see very well, but going off to the right, kind of under the mulch, there's a big limb that has headed out that way. I need to get rid of that. So I'm going to use a saw to do that. Again, I've sprayed it down with disinfectant. Would make a sizable rose bush in its own right. That was probably a third of the entire bush, but it was just in the wrong place. Now I'm back to my Felco clippers, which I have again sterilized by spraying them with Lysol spray. On a big bush like this, even if I were wearing good gloves, there's always the danger of shedding blood. And so there's nothing wrong with just kind of hacking into it to open up some space. And then you can go in after that and correct your messy cuts. So I'm going to do a bit of that. One of the things I want to do on this bush is to get it out of the walkways in this garden. I need to keep it inside the bed so it doesn't grab passersby. I'm trying to get rid of branches that are crossing over each other. And tea roses have a tendency to make a lot of little twiggy stuff. It's just not very useful this time of year, so I'm going to get rid of those and keep the things that are probably finger thick or thicker. If this were a much younger bush that didn't have a lot of big canes, I might leave some of that twiggy stuff there, but on a bush this size, I don't need it. Now I've got kind of a window opening up here. That's going to give me a lot more room to work. Apologize that you're seeing so much of my back. I can't seem to aim the camera any better. In different years I might have had a live cameraman moving around and aiming this better, but this is February 2021, so we're at the height of the COVID pandemic, and I don't have a cameraman. I would have to be wearing a mask if I had another person nearby, so I figured it was better to do it without a cameraman, with a tripod, without a mask, than to try it with a live person with a mask. I will undoubtedly edit some of this out because this is going to take a while, and there'll be long periods of time where you're not seeing anything useful. Now that I can get into this bush without being stabbed, I can start working toward making a nicely shaped top, working kind of from the bottom up. I'm using some of the same philosophy that we use for hybrid teas. I'm going to try to make this more or less a vase shape, make it nicely symmetrical. I'm trying to get rid of any branches that cross over each other by removing the less desirable of the two crossovers. But I'm going to leave a lot more plant than I would on a hybrid tea edges. Now, I'm rather liking the symmetry of this thing. Just thinking about what else may need to come off. I've ended up removing all of the leaves. If it's convenient, I will do that. That certainly cuts back on black spot for a while. But if it's a plant that has just hundreds and hundreds of leaves after I've pruned it, I usually don't bother to take the time to do that. This garden is sprayed for black spot regularly, so it's not really all that beneficial, I guess, to completely defoliate at this time of year. So this is pretty well done. I'm fairly happy with that. It is fairly globular with a fairly open center. If we can get where you can see that. And let me get in closer here. The buds near the top are aimed so that they will not send a cane out immediately over the walkway. I don't want them to go back in on each other, but I also don't want this plant to immediately trespass on the walkway. It will eventually, of course. There's no way around that. And we'll prune those off when the time comes. So this looks pretty good. I think I'm happy with it.